Hello followers and welcome back to my Minecraft tutorial. This is episode 57 and in today's episode we're going to be looking at memory circuits. So what are memory circuits? Well, memory circuits are devices such as RS NOR latches and T flip-flops. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. Now this is where Redstone can get a bit confusing, and as you can see there's a lot of signs and stuff labelled. So before we really get into today's episode, I do want to reiterate, if you have any questions please put them in the comments. So this is probably as hard as it's going to get. And I think the thing is with this is people go on the wiki page for the memory circuits and they kind of get a bit confused because the diagrams are basically a downward view and they have lots of letters and there's stuff everywhere and it can be quite hard to see what's going on, and it can be a bit frightening I think for some people because they don't understand it. So hopefully by the end of this video you'll have a better understanding of what RS latches are and what they do, and what delayed resets do and what T flip-flops do. So that's kind of the objective. So latches and flip-flops are basically 1-bit memory cells. So if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. But that's what it is. They allow circuits, so these, to store data and deliver it at a later time, rather than acting only on the inputs at the time they are given. So everything else we've looked at up to this point will always do something straight away. We can't store information in Redstone without using one of these circuits. So as a side effect of this, they can turn an impulse into a constant signal, and what that means is it just turns a button into a lever basically. So I'm sure many of you have seen various devices which act like what a lever would but actually use a button, and that is what a T flip-flop is basically. But that is what these actually do. So devices using these latches can be built to give different outputs each time a circuit is activated, even if the same inputs are used. And so circuits using them are referred to as sequential logic. Don't worry about that if you don't understand that either. They allow for the design of counters, which is an advanced Redstone circuit, long-term clocks, which are clocks that a bit longer than what we looked at in the last episode, and also complex memory systems which are used in computers and things like that. So they cannot be created, you see, with just standard logic gates and everything that we've looked at so far. They need something that is of a bit higher level, and that is what these do. So that's it. And latches are also used when a device, so a Redstone device, needs to behave differently depending on the previous inputs. So depending on what has already happened, they can act differently depending on when something else happens. So there are several basic categories of latches distinguished by how they are controlled. So they're different because they're controlled differently. For all types, the input lines are labelled according to their purpose, and these are the letters that you'll see on the wiki. And these are S, which stands for set, R, which stands for reset, T, which stands for toggle, D, which stands for data, and C, which stands for clock. And we'll talk about these more when we get into the circuits. And there are also more arbitrary labels, and all that means is that there are a few which have a few question marks around them. For example, the output is commonly labelled Q, and I don't know why that is. The wiki doesn't seem to know why either, but it's for historical reasons apparently. And sometimes there is an inverse output which is always on when Q is off, and that is Q with a line above it. Now in all the examples today, the Q and the Q with a line above it are pistons. So here we have Q. This is what Q is. So I haven't labelled these, but if you see a piston and something changes as I go through these, that is what Q is. Okay? Hope you've got that. So now let's see here. So if both Q and Q with a line above it are available, we say that this circuit has dual outputs. Most of the following types can be built as a latch that responds to the level of signal, and also, or as a flip-flop which can be triggered by a change in the signal. So latches are dependent on the strength of the signal, and T flip-flops are triggered by a change, so it turns on or off. So let's see here then. An RS latch has separate control lines to set, which in these examples is S, or to reset, which means turn off, and that is R. Many also have dual outputs, and we will actually look at this when we look at these in a minute. They actually have dual outputs. They have Q and Q with a line above it. I don't know what Q with a line above it actually is pronounced, so I'm just calling it Q with a line above it. So I guess we're just going to have to kind of live with that. Beyond that, the oldest form of RS latch in Minecraft is the RS door latch, which forms the heart of many other latch and flip-flop designs. So as we look through these, you will actually see RS door latches are quite common. And then there is the T latch, which only has one input, the toggle, and that is a T flip-flop. Another name for it is a T latch. And whenever the toggle is triggered, the latch changes its state from off to on or vice versa. There are also SRT latches, combining the inputs and the abilities of the RS and T latches together, but we're not going to look at those today because they're a bit more complicated. So we're going to leave those alone for the time being, plus they're not very commonly used either. And there is also a D latch, which has a data input and a clock input. And when the clock is triggered, so when a redstone clock gets triggered, the data input, so whatever D is at, is copied to the output and then held until the clock is triggered again. And we'll talk about that when we get down there if you're unsure on that. There is also another type of latch called a JK latch, but they are very complicated and they are not really used at all in survival. They are used for more complex things, such as the construction of computers and other things. These are generally used in stuff like mob traps or other cool little devices, which we can actually play around with in survival more easily. So that's why I am kind of missing out the JK latches. If you want to know more information, there will be a link in the description to the memory circuits page on the Minecraft wiki, but the designs there are very big and will be very hard to explain, so we're just going to stick to what we know for right now and keep it simple. So let's get off with the RS latches then. So these are RS NOR latches. So an RS NOR latch has two inputs, S and R. So S stands for set, so we set what's going on, and R stands for reset, and we reset back to what set is. And that is all it is. And the output is conventionally labeled Q. We don't actually have an output on this particular one, but this one over here, for example, has an output here and an output here. And I believe how it's designed is the one with R on it for reset actually is that is the Q with the line above it, and that is just normal Q. And these aren't too important, the differences between these for what we're covering, but as you get into more advanced things, these do become more important. But for now, we're just going to kind of consider them collectively as outputs. So I think from now on, I will actually refer to Q and Q with a line above it as an output, just to keep things simple. So when there is an inverse output, that is the Q with the line above it, and a normal output, then we have dual outputs. So when a signal comes into S, Q is set, well, the output is set on until a similar signal comes in to R. So in this example right here, what I'm saying here is you push this button and it sets it. So in this case, everything here is powered on, but if I push R, we flip. As you can see, it flips. So if I press S again, it flips again, and that is basically what this RS NOR latch is all about. It flips when you push a button or a lever or whatever it is, but if you used a lever, you would have to turn it off again. Where an output is available, you can often save a NOT gate by using it instead of just a normal output. Typical uses of this include alarm systems, which a warning light or a note block stays on after a pressure plate is activated until like a little reset button is pressed. So for example, on the set side, you would have a pressure plate here, and if a mob wandered onto it, say a creeper, what you would do is this would then be triggered on, and you have a line here which you could then send to a redstone clock, which then turns a note block on very rapidly. You could also have lights flashing and stuff like that, and that will tell you that there is a mob around, and it will stay on and doing that until you press the R, which will then turn it back off again. So that is what you can use for that. There are also uses for it in rail and minecarts. You can use it to set a T-junction and then reset it by using a different pair of detector rails, but we will actually look at that more when we get into minecarts themselves, which will be in a couple of episodes time, I think. Well, it might be a fair while, but we'll look at that separately, but that is another use of it as well. So RS latches are common parts of other circuits, including other sorts of latches. Any RS latch with dual outputs is functionally symmetrical. Pulsing each input turns on its output and turns off the other one. So all that means is these, as I was saying earlier, are basically the same in this particular example. So R and S are interchangeable. And you can also swap the outputs, obviously, depending on which input you've put into it. Which input you pick as S chooses which of the outputs is Q. So if I set this to be S and that to be R, it will just function the opposite way to what it is right now. So that's pretty simple to understand. So besides that, there is also, I think that's actually about it. So let me see here. I have like a little sticky note thing that I'm reading off because there's a lot to get through. Yeah, that's about it actually as regards these guys. There's not a whole lot more to explain. So here we have another example. So let's recap. So we've got S, which remember stands for set. We are setting the circuit. And we've got this here. This is also S. And here we have R and R. So this one actually has two sets of inputs, and you can flip here and then here, or equally you can do it the other way. So as you can see here, you've got more inputs. Now the uses for this would probably be oh well, I mean mainly the same things as this really. But these can be used with more inputs if you needed that. So here we have a sort of a diagonal one, I guess you could call it, which you can separate the outputs here. This has actually got outputs on it. These you could attach outputs to. You would need to use off the side of these two blocks here, and in this one a similar thing off the two sides of the block. But here we already have outputs provided, so this will give you a good representation of what's going on. So here we have set, so it's currently set, and this piston is turned on, and remember this stands for Q. And if I push this one to reset, this piston will then activate, but this one will then deactivate. So we have that design there, and we have a nice, fairly small one here as well, and we have set here, so we've got this in the middle. We have set here, so it's currently set, so this piston is on. If I push reset, then it's going to flip. And this is the fundamental principle of the RS latches, or RS NOR latches should I say. This one here is very useful because it is actually only a one high design, whereas these require more than one block high, so if you need to get it in quite flat, then you do have this option here. So again, here we set, so this piston is on, then I can push R, which is reset, and it will flip. So we have this now. This uses repeaters as well. This is a repeater based version if you want to use those and kind of save on making it quite big. And we have another one here which is one high as well, and this is a very, very compact version here which uses only 2 blocks and a little bit of redstone and then 2 torches. So here we have S on the back. Of course you could flip these, so we could set the circuit, which it currently is, so this piston is on, and then if you push R it will flip. And this is a vertical version if you needed to get it into a wall. S is right here, so we could set the circuit, this piston is on, or we can reset the circuit by pushing this button here. Now one thing to take note of when dealing with these is if you push say set once after you've pushed it, so we've just set it again, if you push it again nothing will happen, so you don't have to worry about messing things up by pushing the same button again. It will only respond to the opposite. Now these probably don't seem all that useful, and that's because they're missing a bit, which makes them really useful, and that is the delayed reset. And we're going to come back to that in a couple of minutes once I've finished talking about the RS NAND latches, which are these guys right here. So RS NAND latches function basically the same way as an RS NOR latch does, but they're a bit less efficient because these require more resources. So they're not as resource friendly, but these are used generally for more specific purposes. So it's equivalent to an RS NOR, but with inverters applied to all the inputs and outputs. So as you can see here, everything is inverted currently. So this one is a bit odd. As you can see, everything is on by default, and it kind of is a bit strange in the way it works, and I've not seen any of these uses at all in survival mode. I've not even seen anybody else but use them. But as you can see here, this is S with a line above it, so this is inverted, and this is R with a line above it, so this too is inverted. Now I'm not sure if the design on the wiki is a bit wrong, or I've managed to screw it up somehow in this particular example, but what I believe is going to happen is if you push a button, one turns off and then the other turns on, but I think that would make it the same as one of those, so I really don't know. There is this other design, and this one seems to work with the levers, and what this one is basically you set, and then when you change reset, they flip. So now as you can see, both are on, but if I turn this off, then we end up with that turning off. Honestly, these are not that useful. I won't lie, you probably won't use these a lot. I've put them in here because they were listed as quite useful. I haven't seen these actually being used outside of probably more advanced stuff. But as I say, these are the logical equivalent as what these are. They do the same thing essentially, but with the outputs and inputs inverted, and I think these would probably be the wrong way to go, unless you really feel the need to use one. I would stick to these because these seem more simpler, and I think these can be a bit more complex to learn. But basically it's the same as an RS NOR latch, but everything's inverted, and I'm not sure really what's going on here, but that's what they are, and that's what they do. So now let's move on to delayed resets. Now, delayed resets, these are incredibly useful. These are what go onto an RS NOR latch to reset it, so you only need to set one button here. So this is S and R now, we're talking about the same things. But before we get into that, let's talk about a specialist circuit which is used in all of the delayed resets, and that is called an ISC, and it stands for Input Stabilization Circuit. And the input stabilizing circuit responds to an input pulse by turning its input on and leaving it on, and this is what one of these is. This can be built up into an RS latch, and then it has a delayed reset on it by adding a means to then turn it off. These circuits don't offer usually a natural Q output, but we can actually add these on, and that's pretty much it. So let's take a look at the input stabilization circuit. So I push the button, it turns it on, but because this repeater is here, it holds the signal and it turns this piston on, and this will stay on indefinitely. Even if I remove that, as you can see, it just stays on indefinitely. So we can use this to actually reset our RS NOR latches. So I'm just going to put this back so that when the world download is released, there's not a button and red wall block missing. So here we have a RS NOR latch, just like what we looked at over there. This is a flat one, and we have this hooked up to it. So if you ignored everything here and just focused on this left side, this is an RS NOR latch. This section is the delayed reset. So if I push this button, watch what happens. So it turns on, and then after this signal reaches this particular area here, it then turns off again. So we have set and included the reset here as well. So what would you use this for? Well, the most common use of this is in the Blaze Monster Spawner Trap. If you check out Etho's video of this, if you YouTube search Etho Blaze Farm and you watch his video, he actually uses an RS NOR latch with a delayed reset to suffocate the blaze until they are down to one punch away from death, and that is what you use this particular design for. Now there are other things you could use this for besides mob suffocation traps. You could use it in automatic farms and all sorts of stuff relating to that, but this is that was one of the most common uses of it. So here again we have a piston based reset, and this is a longer delay. You can actually customize the length of delay. You don't have to use something like this where it's pre-provided for you, and this is where timing becomes very important of your repeaters. And you can actually stack repeaters up like this, as we already know, and they will pass through it at a certain amount of time. So say in a suffocation trap you would want to set it so that enough time has passed through these repeaters until the piston retracts, so that the mob stops suffocating, so that you can just punch them once and they die. Now this is where repeaters come in extremely handy, because we know that we can control the amount of delay on these from 1 tick up to 4 ticks. Now if you want to work that out, then all you're going to have to do is just add these up basically, and then you can work those out into real-time seconds. As we know, 10 ticks equals 1 real-life second. So here we have a piston-based version. As you can see, it activates, the signal passes through the repeaters, and then it just pushes the piston out, which temporarily cuts the circuit, and then it resets itself, and then the output turns off. And a similar thing here, but we rely on the fact that pistons and blocks can be used with repeaters to push a signal through. We can actually reset this by using this torch here, by turning it off for a brief second, pulling it away. So here we have the same example. Let's just push the button. There's your output, and it will pass through, and then it will turn off again. So that is that one. Now here, this one is a bit different. This is an enable or disable RS latch, and this one is a bit of a quirky one. It's kind of a more advanced design, honestly. And what these are is we have a lockable state here, and as you can see, 2 of them have levers and just 1 has buttons. So at the moment, as you can see, this will flip depending on whether I choose this lever or not. Now what E is doing, E stands for lock, and I know it's a bit weird. S still stands for set and R still stands for reset, but E stands for lock. So if E is not on, note the torch is now on because we are using an AND gate here, and then I do this, this will do nothing. And neither will this. E needs to be on, and now if I push this button, nothing will happen either, because we have not set the circuit yet. We need to set using a lever, that will flip it, and now we can use R to reset for a brief second, and it will turn this one on. Now this one again is a bit of a quirky one. It's not that useful, but it was listed. You can enable or disable this thing if you really want to. If you put a button on here, then they will just switch, but no, if you do this, nothing will happen. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that you need to know as regards them. So these are the delayed resets. This is a enable or disable RS latch. This is a bit different from the delayed resets, but it was included in the same section. So that's what that does. So now we need to move on to D latches, and we're not going to talk about these for too long because these are not very often used, certainly in simple redstone. But a D latch stands for a data latch, basically, and they have 2 inputs as well, C and D. C stands for clock and D stands for data. Now data is what information you want to give the output. So in this particular example here, if we wanted this piston to be powered, we would turn this on, then you would receive an input from C, which will lock this. It locks the repeater. This is the latching feature we talked about in the repeater episode. And now, regardless of what happens with D, the data is preserved until C receives another pulse, and it turns off again, and then it reverts back to whatever D was doing. So if this is still on, and this turns on, and it obviously locks it, but then C receives another pulse and turns off, D's state will be preserved. So these are a bit odd, honestly. I don't know really what you would use this for, to be honest. This particular design is called a gated D latch. So these are kind of a bad example. This would be hooked up to some form of clock circuit, basically. So I could imagine that you could use this if you wanted something on. For example, you wanted to keep something on and then you wanted to lock it on for a certain amount of time before turning it off. You could use this, I guess, in an automatic form. You could turn it on and then lock it so that it can't turn off until all the stuff's flushed away if you accidentally happen to flick the lever again. So that is a use that you could have for it. Honestly, I can't think of too much else. And this here is actually a D flip-flop is what they call this. And this one, I've played around with this a bit and I honestly don't really get what it's for. So we have the data line here, which we can send information into the output. So here we've set D to maintain the output as on. I can then turn on C, so we've got the clock input, which then locks this, so regardless of whether D turns off, then it's still going to preserve its state, but if C turns off, then we end up locking this one, and then the output turns off. This I don't know really what you would do with, honestly. I really don't know what this is for. There's probably some advanced uses for it, but I would steer clear of this personally. If I wanted to use some sort of flip-flop, I would go with the T flip-flop over whatever this thing is. There are some older designs using redstone torches, but because of this new latching feature that we have, we don't actually need those anymore. But if you want to know what they are still available on the wiki, which you can check down below in the description. So there's not so much really to talk about with those. So besides that, now we just have to talk about the final one, and that is T flip-flops. And I'm sure everybody has heard of these. These are very, very common. These are merged a lot with other circuits as well because they are extremely useful. And if you remember what I said at the start of the episode, these basically turn a button into a lever, basically. And all the inputs here are T. So as you can see, T and T. T stands for toggle. So basically it's either on or off. So this is like if the lever was up or if it was down. So watch what happens if I push this button. Now as you can see, it does, I think it's called oscillate or something like that for a little bit, but it does eventually finish by turning on. And then if I push it again, it will actually turn off. So this is quite a bad design. This is what you typically want to avoid when using a T flip-flop, but you can actually use this design if you really want to. This is basically a toggle device. You can toggle on or off, but it does actually oscillate or whatever it is. The actual device that this name derives from is called an oscilloscope. So I don't know how you would really say oscillate or something, maybe. I don't know, but that is what it does anyway. And here, this is a much better version. This is a piston-based version, so if you wanted this to be silent, then you would actually have a bit of a problem here because there is a piston. Now, here we have the toggle. So watch what happens. As you can see, it grabs the block and pulls it back over that redstone torch, so that then the torch can power this block. Remember, first degree power, remember that, and then it will power this block right here, turning the output, which is here, on. Now if I push it again, it will turn it off. So this is basically what a T flip-flop is. There's just one redstone torch there. Now if we see what's happening, if I power this, as you can see, while it's being briefly powered, this actually gets locked for a little minute, and then there's a quick pulse go through which lets the piston grab the block. So that's what's going on there. Here we have a slightly more complex version using a couple more repeaters, but the principle is the same. Here we actually have two outputs instead of the regular one. So if I push the button, the output swaps. And again, if I push it, it swaps again. So the difference here between this and an RS NOR latch, for example, is that you don't actually need two inputs. So that is what the difference is here. Here is a vertical version using more repeaters and pistons. Here is your toggle. There you go, it turns on. Now, one thing I will say about this one is I don't know how anyone can say redstone is not cool if they watch this. I just think it's really cool how quick it grabs that block and all the pistons fire at once, basically. I just really like that design. Great for vertical use if you want to get it in a wall. Here is another design. This one is more piston based, but here is your toggle right there. And as you can see, it activates and then you can push it again to retract. And please do note that the input can move. If there was a piece of redstone dust here, then you could extend this on somewhere and then activate it from there. Don't feel obligated to put the button right here. It doesn't have to always be there. So finally, there is this specialist T flip-flop, which is perhaps my most favourite design, and this is called Grisdale's T flip-flop. And this one relies on two new items added into the game in Minecraft 1.5, and that is the hopper and the dropper. So this is basically the same as all these, but it uses a lot less redstone. The downside to this is that you need a comparator, and you need access to the nether for comparators. So what this one does is basically there is an item. I've got just one stone brick in there, one stone brick block, and whenever I push this dropper, as you can see, it activates, and that is because it is now stored in here. So it was originally in there. We push the button. As we know, the button will able to go into this one, pushing it into this one, and because there is nothing in here, then there is nothing to go back into the chest. So now we've got the stone bricks in here. It's currently on because the comparator is picking up, hey, there's an item in here. So I'm going to power for one block and then we buff it up with a repeater. If I push this button again, then it turns off because it goes into the chest and then into the hopper and then back into the dropper. So this is a really cool compact design. I really like this. Great for vertical use. This is perhaps the most common one that I would use in a world because it's very simple to explain and use. The downside is it probably requires a couple more resources than you would need without like the comparator would need nether quartz, so we need access to that. That's the downside. But actually I think in the long term, because this is an output, if I got rid of that, all you need is 4 blocks, 2 droppers which are crafted with cobble and redstone, a hopper which is crafted with 5 iron, and a chest itself and a bit of redstone. You need to make pistons here. You need lots of pistons and various different bits and pieces here, so you would probably save on resources in that way, in the sense that you need probably less wood, maybe less cobble depending on the way you did it. But this is a really nice one. I like this one, so props to Grisdale for coming up with that one. He is a Minecraft forums user and that was listed on the wiki as a specialist T flip-flop. So they are the memory circuits. Now, as I said, remember with these the input can move to a degree. Obviously if you want to take it more than 15 blocks, you're going to need a repeater to buff the signal up, and so as you can see here, you can actually move these fairly easily by using Redstone Dust. So in today's episode we've looked at RS NOR latches and how they work. We then looked very briefly at the very odd RS NAND latch, and then we looked at the delayed resets that these RS NOR latches can have. We then took a look at the D latches and flip-flops, and we kind of we got a bit confused here, and then we talked about T flip-flops and what these can do. In terms of practical uses for a T flip-flop, I mean there's just plenty, because it turns a button into a lever, so anything that you can do with a lever you can actually do with a button using this, and some people just generally prefer that. The most common use of this is to open a door, like a piston door, by just using a button to turn it on. Opens the door, then you can push the button on the way out and it will just close the door again. Some people might want to go for the RS NOR latch and build a door using that, so that you push a button and after so long it resets and closes the door. Now for me, I would personally prefer a T flip-flop so that I don't spontaneously get a door closing behind me. It would kind of be a bit freakish, but you have to remember to turn it off on your way out, so that's just something you would have to consider, I guess, depending on what you really wanted. So that's going to be about it from me today, guys. I hope that you have found this tutorial useful. There's been a lot covered today, so as I said at the start of the episode, if you have any questions, then please put them in the comments. I will be more than happy to answer. In the next episode, we are going to be taking a final spin round of this world, and we're going to be looking at two quirky redstone circuits, and they're a bit more advanced than what we have learnt so far. And that is the very quirky bud switch and also the randomizer. And then after that we are back onto the regular world, guys. I'm looking forward to getting into the new 1.6 stuff very soon. So if you're not such a big fan of Redstone, then don't worry, we're going to be getting back to some other things soon. So yeah, that's going to be just about it from me today, guys. I hope that you've enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time. So until then, guys, see you later and have a good day.